Sorry about that, folks. Welcome back. We were talking about Silicon Valley. If someone can post this in the chat where we had the last stream so others can join us. Sorry we got cut off there, temporarily interrupted. I'm still here and I'm still talking. So if someone could post this link in the chat so we can continue doing our thing. I got cut off there, I had to deal with something, but I'm here, not going anyplace, and I've got plenty more to talk to you about. So please post this link and we will continue. We'll give us a few minutes for everyone to pile on in here. I'll pour some more unnamed diet beverage. While people pile on in, the show is not over, the show has just begun. We may get cut off once again. Crazy world, but I ain't going anywhere for now. So, welcome, welcome. Glad to see folks are joining us once again. Please post this link. We've been temporarily cut off, but we're back. So I mentioned, as I went over Silicon Valley, as I went over who they are, there's an individual named Marilyn Ferguson. She wrote this book, The Aquarian Conspiracy. Marilyn Ferguson was the spiritual advisor to Al Gore. Right? She was very close to Ted Turner. It says here that Al Gore participated in her informal network. Right? And that in 1980 she published this book. Now, folks, I want to just read to you a little bit from this book. And this book, mind you, is not a fringe, irrelevant book. It's endorsed here by Carl Rogers, one of the most famous psychologists, who, if you Google it, also owes his career to the CIA. It's endorsed here by Arthur Kessler, one of the main anti-communist, ex-communist writers from Germany. He put out a book called The God That Failed. This book has gotten quite an endorsement. Right? At the same time that Silicon Valley is starting to set up shop, as we just went over, with CIA money, this book is published. The Aquarian Conspiracy. And it basically describes how there is a movement of personal and social transformation taking place all over the world. It's not pro-communist, it's not anti-communist, it's changing. It says there are school teachers, office workers, famous scientists, government officials, lawmakers, artists, millionaires, and taxi drivers, leaders in medicine, education, science, law, and psychology. Some are open in their advocacy and may be familiar. There are legions of conspirators. They are in corporations, universities, and hospitals, on the faculties of public schools, in factories and doctors' offices, on city councils and in the White House staff, in state legislatures, volunteer organizations, and virtually all areas of policy making. She talks about the great paradigm shift. The paradigm of the Aquarian Conspiracy sees humankind as embedded in nature. It promotes the autonomous individual in a decentralized society. Remember what I just read you about how they feel they owe no one anything? The autonomous individual in a decentralized society. Human nature is neither good nor bad, but open to continuous transformation and transcendence. The Aquarian Conspiracy. Basically, it's time to unleash the chaos, unleash individuals, decentralize society. Some scary stuff here. This is particularly interesting because it seems to focus, the text seems to focus on changing individuals and how they see the world. and then involving them in a mass effort to change the world itself. Writes here, talks about triggers. Right? How do you change an individual? It says the intentional triggers of transformative experiences are numberless, yet they have a common quality. They focus awareness on awareness, a critical shift. For all their surface variation, most focus on something too strange, complex, diffuse, or monotonous to be handled by the brain's and intellectual half. On breathing, repetitious physical movement, water, flame, a meaningless sound, a blank wall, a paradox. What in the world is she talking about? But she's talking about all these methods through which you can trigger people to change, to have their personal transformation, to join the great social transformation that she is advocating. Sensory isolation and sensory overload, because sharply altered input can cause shifts in consciousness. Sensory isolation, that's like putting someone in solitary confinement, right? That's what that is. When people are in solitary confinement, they start to lose their minds, right? Prisons all across the country, they have solitary confinement facilities. And you'll notice that people who go into solitary confinement for a long time come out psychologically damaged. They can't look you in the face, right? Their ability to speak and to communicate is damaged. What else does she talk about? Hypnosis and self-hypnosis. Seminars like EST, that's Landmark Forum, Silva Mind Control, Actualizations, LifeSpring, which attempt to break the cultural trance and open the individual to new choices. The Fisher-Hoffman process, a similar re-entry into childhood anxieties, followed by an intense use of imagery reconciliation with forgiveness of one's parents for negative early childhood experiences, right? She says all of these approaches might be called psychotechnologies, systems for a deliberate change in consciousness. She's talking about how to brainwash people, right? She says the first stage is preliminary, almost happenstance, entry point. The entry point can be identified in retrospect. Changes in the brain chemistry triggered by psychedelics cause the familiar world to metamorphose. She starts talking about LSD and how you can begin your psychological transformation by taking LSD, by taking psychedelic drugs, by taking hallucinogens. This is in here. This is Al Gore's spiritual advisor. Right? Step 2 is for the exploration. Step 3 is integration, right? And step 4, where is step 4? Not only does the new paradigm work in his own life, but it seems to work for others. If the mind can heal and transform, why can't the minds join to heal and transform all of society? Now in the 4th stage, conspiracy, he discovers other sources of power, ways to use it for fulfillment and in service to others. All right? So she's basically describing we have to change the way people think. And there's many ways of doing it, like you can, give them sensory overload, or you can give them sensory deprivation, or you can hypnotize them, or you can, have them relive traumatic childhood experiences. And this is all psychotechnology to change the way people think. But it gets better. It gets so much better. So much better. So she's explaining this conspiracy to change the way people think. I mean, this is her words, conspiracy. I'm not calling it a conspiracy because I'm a conspiracy nut. I'm saying the name of the book is The Aquarian Conspiracy. She says America is free, but California is freer. If America is open to innovation, innovation is California's middle name. And then she starts naming, you can't make this up, she starts naming the institutions in California that are working with her on her great project for social and personal transformation. She says, in California, the old social compartments are being broken down, and we are creating a new aristocracy, an aristocracy of those who care, Membership is restricted only by the capacity for concern. In Santa Barbara, with the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, the Center for the Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences in Palo Alto, and the Stanford Research Institute. She names 3 CIA-linked research institutions that are working with her on this project, right? She goes on to describe the Club of Rome. Do folks remember the Club of Rome? The think tank that published a document called The Limits to Growth that argued there were too many people in the world and we had to desperately reduce the human population. Right? The yeast of change, the scattered myriad of spontaneous groupings of people springing up here and there like antibodies in a sick organism. Right? There's a sense of imminent world transformation. Right? She talks about the Threshold Foundation in Switzerland. She talks about Catholics and Protestants risking their lives in Northern Ireland, the Israeli movement of soldiers to combat and to risk combat and give peace a chance. Right? This is Marilyn Ferguson, the spiritual advisor to Al Gore, who had events with him in the White House, the spiritual advisor to Ted Turner, all kinds of people. And of course, she lists as ground zero for her conspiracy, Southern California. She lists Palo Alto. She lists an institution called the Stanford Research Institute. Well, again, because you're going to say I made this up, it sounds way too wacky. It sounds way, way too wacky, right? If someone just told me this, I wouldn't believe it. Parapsychology research at the Stanford Research Institute. The Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California, carried out research on various phenomena characterized as parapsychology from 1972 to 1991. Early studies indicating that phenomena, such as remote viewing and psychokinesis, could be specifically studied and were published in such mainstream journals as, and list the journals. This attracted the sponsorships of such groups as NASA and the Central Intelligence Agency. Right? All kinds of documentation that the Stanford Research Institute, which Marilyn Ferguson lists as ground zero of this great social and personal transformation that she's leading, was conducting all kinds of research into weird psychic powers and all kinds of weird stuff. Weird stuff. It gets weirder and weirder and weirder. Now, folks, I read you her process in here. Marilyn Ferguson's process. Of social transformation. I read in here her process of personal transformation. Right? At first, the person has their triggering experience with LSD or with hypnosis or with social with sensory deprivation or sensory overload or with various planned workshops where they relive childhood trauma or whatever. Then from there, they become educated. Then from there, they become integrated into the new lifestyle. And then they join a conspiracy with other people to carry out the social transformation. Your personal transformation has 3 stages. And then in the 4th stage, you join the social transformation. Well, you all should check out this book. The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, the CIA, and Mind Control. And they describe the exact same process. they call it. Unfreeze, change, refreeze. And they did all kinds of experiments with LSD and with hypnosis, all kinds of stuff, right? This is who's running Silicon Valley. A group of people that essentially believe that we must transition to a decentralized world in which the individual is completely unleashed and unrestrained by society. This is insanity. It is insanity, and it is so insane that even people like the Wall Street Journal and even people in the Trump administration who are right-wing and cruel, even they think it's insane, right? It's too individualist even for these people. The Wall Street Journal is ranting against them, saying these people have no... Let me read to you again what it said. Unlike the dead aristocrats in churchyards, the geeks who run Google and Facebook have no sense of guilt to give them pause and few ties of blood and soil to a particular patch of land. They believe their fortunes are the product of nothing but their own innate genius. They owe the rest of us nothing. Let me read to you once again what Marilyn Ferguson says the goal is. The paradigm of the Aquarian Conspiracy sees humankind as embedded in nature. It promotes the autonomous individual in a decentralized society. The autonomous individual in a decentralized society. Folks, this sounds like things that are completely unconnected, right? It's like, first I told you that Silicon Valley is in with Biden, that Biden and Silicon Valley are on the same page. That is blatantly obvious. Silicon Valley was pulling for Biden. Silicon Valley wanted Biden to win. Silicon Valley at this point is suppressing Donald Trump's tweets. Silicon Valley at this point has suppressed that Hunter Biden story about the Hunter Biden scandal. Silicon Valley is with Biden. And I read to you at the beginning all the connections, how, at this point, Biden has named the legal counsel of Facebook to his transition team. He's named Eric Schmidt, the founder of Google, to his transition team. That Kamala Harris, her brother-in-law, is the chief lawyer for Uber, right? I read to you all the connections. I read to you all those connections. I read them to you, right? And then I read to you about how the CIA created Silicon Valley, how there would be no Silicon Valley without the CIA. And then I read to you a crazy, crazy manifesto by a spiritual advisor to all kinds of congressmen and leading political figures, who it turns out is shilling for all kinds of weird CIA-linked think tanks that just happen to be based in Silicon Valley. And then I read to you, I showed you how the personal transformation leading to social transformation process that she describes in her book is exactly the mirror of the brainwashing process that the CIA developed with their LSD experiments and their crazy mind control research during the Cold War. Folks, I'm telling you that the Silicon Valley elite are a special breed of evil. That doesn't mean Trump is good. I'm never saying Trump is good. Trump is not good, okay? We can all agree on that. Trump is a warmongering murderer. Trump is a racist. Trump is an anti-immigrant bigot. Trump is a brutal authoritarian. He's supporting the police. No one here... What loyalty? No one here is trying to say that these people are worse than Trump. That's not what I'm telling you. but I want you to understand who it is who is going to rule over us for the next 4 years. Folks, I wrote a book about Kamala Harris, and I have that book right here. Just have to take it out from under the camera there. I have the book right here. Right? Kamala Harris and the Future of America. And in this book, I talk about the Hillary Clinton State Department. Right? During the Obama administration, Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State. And Hillary Clinton wanted to run for president once again in 2020. And when it was made clear that the U.S. public was not going to have Hillary Clinton run for president once again, the donors to Hillary Clinton, the backers of Hillary Clinton, all put their money behind this woman, behind Kamala Harris. It's a matter of public record. Right? There was a meeting in the Hamptons. I read to you from, it's well understood, Kamala Harris was the new Hillary Clinton. And that faction is in with Silicon Valley and did some crazy evil things during the Obama years. Some crazy evil things during the Obama years. Unbelievable. During the Obama years, right after Barack Obama took office, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. I talk about in the book how Jared Andrew Cohen, who worked in the Hillary Clinton State Department, was a former employee of Google Alphabet. He immediately went over to Twitter and told Twitter to take some actions that would facilitate protests against the government of Iran. Did not ask the Obama administration for permission to do this, just did it. And the Obama administration found out that Jared Andrew Cohen was going to Google and going to Twitter and giving them instructions on behalf of the State Department without asking them, tried to fire Jared Andrew Cohen. But according to The New Yorker, Hillary Clinton protected Jared Andrew Cohen. Later, we found out that during the Arab Spring, Jared Andrew Cohen of Google Alphabet and of the U.S. State Department was working with Hillary Clinton and was working with Facebook and Twitter to manipulate the events of the Arab Spring, to unleash chaos throughout the Middle East. And what was the result of that? Libya, the country that had the highest life expectancy on the African continent, were being reduced to rubble. Folks, remember how there was video going through the internet of evil atrocities by evil Gaddafi, and the people of Libya were rising up against Gaddafi? And now Libya has been in shambles ever since. They've got slavery in Libya at this point, human chattel slavery. They've got two factions fighting each other for power. People are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out. Libya reduced to utter chaos. Millions of people have their lives destroyed if they're not dead, right? Thousands and thousands of people are dead. Millions of people in Libya have their lives destroyed because Twitter and Facebook manipulated the events and set the stage for the instability in Libya that then justified the NATO airstrikes. The folks remember what happened in Syria and how one of the only countries in that region where you have Sunni and Shia, Christians, Alawites, all living together in peace, was reduced to complete and utter chaos, a mass refugee crisis, millions of people dying. Not dying, millions of people haven't died, but millions of people becoming refugees, at least 500,000 people dead. Syrian civil war, again fomented with Twitter and Facebook and Al Jazeera. Do people remember this? Do people remember Honduras? Where just right after Obama took office, long before the Arab Spring, Honduras, 2009, the socialist president, Manuel Zelaya, is toppled in a military coup, dragged out of the presidential mansion in his pajamas, and the military takes over. And Barack Obama is asked about this as the new president. He says, well, that's clearly not legal. The military can't overthrow the government. Because he doesn't know that Hillary Clinton has been meeting with the coup plotters, and they've been planning this all along. Look at the refugees on the border. How many of them are coming from Honduras? Honduras has the highest murder rate in the world at this point. Narco chaos. I mean, it has been complete instability in Honduras, complete instability in Libya, complete instability in Syria, millions of lives destroyed, a refugee crisis. ISIS and Al-Qaeda set up shop in Libya and in Syria, right? ISIS emerged out of the US-backed terrorists to destabilize Syria. All of this is happening. Folks, I'm trying to spell it all out for you. It may sound like completely disconnected things, but I am reading you actual sources. I read you articles from mainstream publications showing you what is going on. That there is a faction within the American ruling class based in Silicon Valley. And they are not economic nationalists like Donald Trump by any means. They are not anti-immigrant bigots like Donald Trump by any means. They are the permanent revolution faction. These people are Trotskyites for capitalism. Right? Trotsky wanted a global permanent socialist revolution. These people want a global permanent capitalist revolution to unleash the individual. That's what they want. These people are Ayn Rand objectivists, extremists, and they want global instability so that they, as the new aristocracy, can have unrestrained power. I mean, it's insane. It is really, really insane. When I just read to you about the Aquarian Conspiracy and Marilyn Ferguson, I just read to you about Silicon Valley and how they started out. I just read to you what the Wall Street Journal said about them. This is the period that we're living in. And the permanent revolution faction, the Hillary Clinton State Department faction, the Eric Schmidt faction, the Zbigniew Brzezinski faction has taken power. These folks are on their way back to the White House. The chances of Trump, becoming president for the next 4 years are very, very small. Biden won this. And I think honestly it was a legit election. I mean there was foul play here, there was foul play there. People can point to this and that, but I am not yet convinced that it was a fraudulent vote. I'm not yet convinced that there was enough foul play to have changed the election. I think that the result of the election is the result. It's a legit result. Biden won the election. But what that means is that the Silicon Valley fascists, the folks who are carrying out Marilyn Ferguson's Aquarian Conspiracy, the folks who engage in, personal transformation, they are back in the White House. That's what's going on here, folks. Let me say it one more time. Will Trump pardon Assange? Tell you one more time. The president-elect has hired Jessica Hertz, a former associate general counsel at Facebook, and Cynthia Hogan, former Apple vice president for government affairs, to his transition team. Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, chief executive, has been talked about to lead the industry task force in the White House. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris, the vice president-elect, has long been supported by Facebook's Sheryl Sandberg and Salesforce's Mark Beinoff. Her brother-in-law, Kamala Harris's brother-in-law, and former chief of staff, Tony West, is Uber's chief legal officer. A senior executive at one major technology company said, Mr. Biden has lots of friends in the industry. Folks, the Aquarian Conspiracy faction, the Silicon Valley fascists, the permanent global revolution for capitalism, the LSD, social transformation, psychic research, CIA, Stanford Research Institute, Palo Alto insanity. This is who is going to be running the government. The same people who ran the Hillary Clinton State Department now have the executive branch under their control. This is what I was trying to get you to understand with the Kamala Harris book. It's a lot of complicated information. A lot of complicated information here. It's not simple. You have to kind of decode this. But basically, Silicon Valley and the global chaos, decentralized world faction, the permanent capitalist revolutionaries, have taken power. That's what's going on here. Right? Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski, his book that he wrote, The Technotronic Age, right? They planned this. Right? And that a particular faction in our ruling class that was thinking long-term and strategically, is not the short-term capitalist interests of Trump and Bernie Marcus and Betsy DeVos, but a more managerial wing of the ruling class that wants to transition to that decentralized authority with the unleashing of the individual. Those folks have taken power. That's what happened in this election. And it may be better, honestly, right? It may be better. Right? I don't know. Right? That's why I was neutral in this election. I don't know. These people are evil. Right? Read my book on Kamala Harris. These people are very, very scary, and they are very, very evil. But Donald Trump's people are very, very scary and very, very evil, as is widely known. But we need to know what we're going to be dealing with for the next 4 years. Well, now we know. Read the Aquarian Conspiracy. Read the writings of Marilyn Ferguson. Read about the Stanford Research Institute. This is who is going to rule us for the next 4 years. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. All right. That was my opening comments after we got interrupted there. I will definitely cut this and make this a longer video, don't worry. I'll, cut out all our interruptions, and I'll put in graphics and make this flow. It was a little bit disjointed, but I think it all worked out anyway. Why don't we do our roll call, names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who's with us today? Names and locations. I'll give you my shout out, and then we'll answer the super chat questions. Lloyd Bennett in Queens, JT24 in Mississippi, Texas, Cleveland, Belize, Pennsylvania, Will DeMarco, Edinburgh in Scotland, Niagara Falls, Milwaukee, Florida, Vallejo, California, Pennsylvania, England, Clydebank. Hello, Tom in Pennsylvania, Union, New Jersey, Los Angeles, Sam 11, the Country of the Blind, Red Sea, New Jersey, Oakland, California, Cape Cod, Antoine from France, Elwood, right? Bermuda, big up Caleb, Rio Grande, Omaha, Nebraska, Canada, Austin, Texas, Culver City, California, Utah, Germany gang, Norway, Tacoma, Washington, Madrid, Spain, Southern Illinois, Republic of Maupin, Maryland, Germany, Southwest Philadelphia, Northern Michigan, London, England, Austin, Texas, Naples, France, Illinois, Brian Schaefer. Patty in Southern California. Portugal, Wakanda. Lafayette, Louisiana. Caracas, Venezuela. Auckland, New Zealand. Buffalo, New York. Great, great, great. Southern Metropolis. Attica, New York, the prison town. Trevor in Ireland. Potemkin Village, England. Fairhope, Alabama. The opioid crisis is being opioid numb, hard times. Good afternoon, Caleb, Southwest UK. Very, very good. Who else is with us? Naples, Florida. Caleb, I like it when you say no way or Norway, joke. Well, I'm glad you like that, Arctic Angel. Niagara Falls, Mexico, Austin, Texas, the Netherlands, Brooklyn, New York, Everett, Washington, Hamilton, Ontario, the Bronx, Kieran from San Diego, Nate from Australia, Herb Bryant in Florida, USA. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. Good stuff. All righty. Washington. All righty. Why don't we start answering the super chats? Glad you like the stream. A lot of technical difficulties. I'm honestly a bit frustrated with the fact that we got interrupted there. I'm going to have to edit this to get it to be coherent. So once I edit it, I'm going to need you all to share the edited video so that it's coherent because, you know, between the interruptions and the, you know, it got to be a little bit messed up. So I'm hoping that negative implications of dang reforms. Negative implications. Okay, but yes, you know, I'm a little frustrated with how that went. Right before I went on, you know, right before we went live, the first time I found out we might be being interrupted, and then we did get interrupted, but then that interruption turned into nothing, and so this was all, it was a bit of a chaotic stream today. So those of you who are here, my thumbs up to you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sticking with us, you know, in the continued stream. You know, we're here, we're doing what we got to do, and you know what? Hey, you know, technical difficulties, things don't always go as well, but that's how you know I'm real, right? I'm not over-manufactured, right? This isn't being, you know, filmed in some, you know, fancy Hollywood studio. I'm not being handed a script by the CIA about what to say. I'm just a guy, right? I'm just a guy. I happen to be a reporter. I happen to be a journalist. I happen to have traveled around the world. I happen to be very knowledgeable about Marxism and socialism, and I happen to have a history as an activist. But at the end of the day, I'm just a guy. I'm talking to you in my iPhone. You know, I got water. I've got unnamed diet beverage. I'm telling you my honest opinion, and I'm saying what needs to be said. Laos, Indochina. Okie dokie. So Libya and Haftar. Well, General Haftar, he's somebody who was in the government of Gaddafi and then switched sides, and now he seems to be aligned with Saif Gaddafi, the son of Muammar Gaddafi, and he controls a big chunk of Libya. Turkey does not like General Haftar in Libya. Turkey is fighting against him, and the UN-recognized government is not the Haftar government. Libya has two governments, and it's in civil war. General Haftar wants to be the leader, and then there is, you know, the UN and the West. The West doesn't seem to like Haftar, which generally makes me tend to think there might be something good going on there, but then again, he did betray Gaddafi, so I don't really know the situation in Libya. I mean, it seems like, you know, the forces in Libya that are anti-imperialist seem to be rallying around Saif Gaddafi, and General Haftar seems to be their guy. So that makes me think that if there's going to be any stability in Libya, which is clearly not what, you know, Western capitalism wants, that General Haftar might be the way to go. But I honestly don't know enough to say that, right? We'll have to see what happens. Obviously, I want peace in Libya more than anything. I want the Libyan people to not be in civil war, to not be fleeing for their lives. I want the great man-made river, which was the world's biggest irrigation project, to be rebuilt. So much of it was destroyed during the NATO war. I want, full electricity back in the country. I want Libyans not to be fleeing for their lives and dying because of what Western capitalism did in Libya. So rather than supporting one faction and declaring one faction to be the good guys, my focus with Libya would be on how can we bring peace to the country. All righty. All right, Farrakhan, Gaddafi. I think it's public record. I think the Nation of Islam admits they received at least a very substantial loan from the Libyan government at one point, right? And that is documented from what I understand. I think they talk about that they did receive some support from Gaddafi at some point. Many, so did the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers got a lot of support from Gaddafi. The Irish Republican Army got support from Gaddafi. The Palestinians, they got support from Gaddafi, but some right-wing groups too. There were some strange, right-wing nationalist groups that also got supported by Gaddafi. And so, Gaddafi is, Gaddafi was very much interested in supporting political groups around the world. He supported the African National Congress as they fought for their freedom and against apartheid. And Gaddafi, he was very, very liberal in handing out some of the oil revenue mainly to progressive anti-imperialist groups. I think he did give some money, unfortunately, to some right-wing groups as well. But, Libya, that was the role they played, and that's why they were targeted. That's why they were labeled as a state sponsor of terror by the U.S. government, right? You have to remember, the African National Congress, the ANC, was on the U.S. government's designated terrorist organizations list. Did you know that? The U.S. government said that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, and that the African National Congress, the current ruling party of South Africa, was a terrorist group. Did you know that? At the same time, the U.S. government was arming Osama bin Laden and his army of mujahideen in Afghanistan to pour acid on the faces of women. At the same time that was happening, the U.S. government labeled the African National Congress, the ANC, to be terrorists. Terrorists. Unbelievable, right? Mujahideen in Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden, al-Zarqawi were heroes, right? Western media had them as heroes, but the African National Congress were terrorists, right? And it's beyond me how so many people calling themselves socialists can now, based on that, based on what I just told you, can now believe the U.S. government when it tells them who to hate this week. Unbelievable. All right, someone asked about loyalty, about loyalty to a nation and all of that. Well, look, human beings are collective creatures, right? They work in groups. They always have. It's part of the nature of mankind. Nations are a group, right? Communities are a group. Religions are a group. Classes are groups. And I think that what the forces that I'm describing here want to do, they said decentralize. They want to break down any sense of group loyalty. They are for the individual above all else. That's what they're for. They're for the individual above all else. And they want to decentralize. They want any form of state power that could possibly stand up to big corporations to be eliminated. They want the unrestrained rule of this new aristocracy that they are describing, of great men who are the motor of the world, right? It's particularly disturbing. They frame it in this very hippy-dippy liberal way, but in essence, they are fighting to unleash the new aristocracy of great individuals to rule over the rest of mankind with no state that can stand up to them, right? That's basically what they want, and they are trying to utilize government power to foment chaos around the world in order to bring this about, and it's very disturbing. And yes, nations, groups, it's complicated, right? I'm not a nationalist, but yes, do they want to break down any sense of national loyalty? Sure, just like they want to break down any sense of religious loyalty, just like they want to break down any class loyalty, right? It's about individualism above all else. Okay, will Trump pardon Julian Assange? Don't count on it. Trump at this point is worried about getting a pardon of his own. When Trump leaves office, he's probably going to be prosecuted. Right? Trump is probably working out a deal right now where he leaves office, without too much fuss, and they don't prosecute him, right? The section of the ruling class that has taken back power and sees Trump as their enemy, they're hungry for blood, and Donald Trump is probably negotiating not getting prosecuted as he leaves office. They've got cases against him across the country. All righty. Opioid, numbing the pain of hard times. Well, they talked about diseases of despair hitting middle America, right? It's not just opioid deaths. That's a big part of it. There's also alcohol poisoning deaths. There's suicide, right? And that the opioid crisis fits the overall hopelessness and pessimism that is gripping the country. People don't have any hope. People don't believe in a future. People are very, very miserable and hopeless. And the opioid crisis is one aspect of that misery and hopelessness that's affecting, it's gripped a huge chunk of the population. It's very, very sad and disturbing. All right, negative implications of Deng Xiaoping's reforms. Well, probably one of the biggest negative implications would be that there has been an increase of a gap between the rich and poor in China, right? You know, there's been an increase in inequality in China. That's certainly a negative implication. What is another result, a negative result of the Deng Xiaoping reforms? I mean, another negative result was that American capitalism has embedded itself in China. Look, there is a whole think tank in China called the Institute for Socialism with Chinese Characteristics. And it's paid for by the Ford Foundation, right? And that just like in the Soviet Union, right, and this happened in the 70s and 80s, the United States, you know, embedded itself and developed, you know, institutions that you know, whispered into the ear of Communist Party leaders and got them to think that American capitalism was not a big threat, and that, you know, there is a lot of American influence inside of China, right? There's a lot of soft power, covert influence, pushing the Chinese Communist Party to be more free market, pushing the Chinese Communist Party to be less anti-imperialist, to be less socialist, you know, and that, you know, that the Deng Xiaoping era reforms made it a lot easier for American intelligence and American propaganda to embed itself in China. At the same time, though, you know, without the Deng Xiaoping reforms, China would never have been able to carry out the huge amount of poverty alleviation it did. China would probably have had a full-on counter-revolution, but, you know, I've talked about this before, about how the Deng Xiaoping reforms took place right after the death of Mao and the death of Zhou Enlai, and how the death of Zhou Enlai, you know, turned into a full-on counter-revolutionary riot, you know, and that there was a huge base of Chinese intellectuals who, because of the terror of the Cultural Revolution, hated the Communist Party. But Deng Xiaoping was able to win those folks back to supporting the Communist Party. So it's complicated. But yeah, there were negative results of that. There were plenty of negative results of the Mao era too. Chuck Schumer talking about empowering police to intervene in the exploding suicide rates. That's interesting. Chuck Schumer. But yes, Laos, right? Well, you know, Laos was a socialist country, is a socialist country. It's a very, very small country. The Lao People's Republic, I believe it's called, is the official name, the Lao People's Republic. And the reason that it is not, you know, part of Vietnam is because of the communists' belief in self-determination, right? I mean, that you know, there are many nationalities within Vietnam, but the Lao nationality made clear it wanted to be a separate country. It did not want to be part of Vietnam. And so when the Socialist Republic of Vietnam was established, the Lao People's Republic was not part of it. And originally, the Lao Communist Party was part of the Vietnamese Communist Party. But when it became clear, you know, things changed, right? Laos is very poor. It's a deeply poor country. But the leaders of it are trying to build socialism. They're friendly to Vietnam. They're friendly to China. Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to it. A very small country. And this is what a lot of people don't seem to understand, right? That, you know, okay, let's say you have $10, right? You and a group of 10 people, you have $10. You can divide it up equally. But everybody will just have $10. Well, just have $1. If you divide up $10 among 10 people equally, everyone just has $1. Right? I mean, if if a communist party takes power in a country that is deeply, 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 deeply poor, what are they supposed to do? All right? What are they supposed to do? Right? It's like, people look at Nepal, right? People look at Zimbabwe. Again, if communists and revolutionaries take power in a country that's very, very deeply poor, their number one priority is poverty alleviation. It's building, it's constructing, and they are going to have to do that. And that, bringing in foreign investment, bringing in, corporations, getting, off the ground so they can develop their own industries, sometimes means that they can't just, build the most egalitarian society, right? And that's, China had to do the Deng Xiaoping market reforms. A lot of China still didn't have running water, still didn't have electricity. The Soviet Union was able to, completely electrify the whole country during the 1930s, but China was not in that position, right? And, in order to raise people up out of poverty and create material abundance, China had to bring in foreign investment, right? And if you come to power in a country like Laos, or you come to power in a country like Nepal, you come to power in a country like Zimbabwe, right? You can't just, declare utopia from above, right? That's very, very naive thinking, that you can take control of the country, you can take control of its economy, but if you're in a desperately poor country, you're going to need foreign investment, and that's just a reality. Chuck Schumer suicide rates. Well, folks, first of all, before I go any further, whenever the topic of suicide comes up, it's very important that I make clear that if you are suicidal, it's important that you consult and immediately consult a mental health professional. If you are considering suicide or feeling like you want to commit suicide, it's very important that you consult a mental health professional. I am not here to advise you about what to do in such a situation. I'm not qualified to do that. So if that is your situation, immediately consult a mental health professional. But as far as Chuck Schumer saying that the police need to figure out how to intervene in all of this, that's interesting. Now, wasn't there a term they used called suicide by cop? That in a lot of instances the police would just shoot somebody and they'd say, oh, well, the person committed suicide by cop. But it seems like, right, having some method of intervening when someone is in a state of suicide, right, some kind of method of intervening to save their life would probably be a good thing, right? I know that part of what was developed, what was proposed in response to some of the defund the police proposals was about having more social workers and having more, mental health professionals working for the government who can intervene in these situations. And usually if someone's going to kill themselves, the police show up. Well, if someone's suicidal and depressed and miserable, having a big cop with his gun, show up and yell at them is, and drag them away in handcuffs is usually not going to help, right? Maybe they need to see a mental health professional, right? And so, on the one hand, Chuck Schumer saying that isn't necessarily all bad, right? I can understand that enhancing the ability of all kinds of institutions to help people that might be suicidal is probably a good thing. However, we know about the police and their record of brutality. We know that police often escalate situations and end up shooting somebody. The police themselves are not necessarily the people to do that. Another thing that I think I'm a little bit concerned about is that mental health is going to be increasingly politicized, right? And I suspect that one trend that's going to develop as we see defund the police, as they're starting to break apart the prison industrial complex, is we're going to see a return of forced hospitalizations. And I think that they're going to start taking people they deem to be troublemakers in society, declaring them to be mentally ill and putting them in mental hospitals. And I think that will start to happen. I think that very much fits the Aquarian Conspiracy, viewpoint, and that there'll be a much more Orwellian turn. I can't predict the future, but I feel like we're moving in that direction, right? With so much of society already on psych meds, with so much of discourse about mental health, I feel like we may start to see a trend of politicized hospitalizations, where and this used to happen. They talk about feminists back in the day were put into mental hospitals. That was very common. If a woman was a feminist or a lesbian, she would be put into a mental hospital. Now when they got rid of mental hospitals and the New Left and these things broke apart, right? They stopped happening. But, we may see a return of the state using, mental health as a way to silence critics, as a way to control people, right? This was one of the saddest things about the prison industrial complex, is many people pointed out that the prisons were full of people who shouldn't be in prison, who they should be getting mental health treatment. Right, there are a lot of people in jail, in prison, who belong in mental health facilities, or if they were rich enough to just get some mental health help, they probably wouldn't be in any facility, right? But unfortunately, if you're very poor and you're mentally ill, you end up in prison, and that's wrong, right? We shouldn't have poor people in prison. So it's a complicated issue, but let's just never forget, the capitalists never let any crisis go to waste. They never let any crisis go to waste. And, they're going to try to turn everything they can into a crisis, into a means of exercising further control and beating back dissent. All righty. Wow, mass line. Someone said, how do we apply the mass line? Well, it's about finding out the things in people's lives that they are unhappy about and getting them to understand how socialism would improve it, and raising real demands, reforms that could exist that could address those concerns that people have, right? Not just simply saying, well, after the revolution, that'll be solved, but actually talking about real demands, right? I laid out that program I've often laid out, the 4 steps, towards socialism, right? About a mass program of reconstruction of the country, public control of oil and natural resources, public control of banking, and enacting Roosevelt's Economic Bill of Rights. That would address a lot of the problems people have in their everyday lives. So I think that's about how one could apply the mass line in our time. So there you go on that. What else is on people's minds? Any other super chats before we conclude here? This has been a wild ride today, between the phone calls and starting and stopping and starting. Oh boy, it's been a wild ride. It's been a wild ride. But tomorrow I'm going to be live. I'm going to be live tomorrow, so hopefully tomorrow we don't have our interruptions. But hey, things happen, right? Wild day. So any other super chat questions before we wrap things up here? Anything else before we conclude this YouTube live conversation? Anything else? Anything else for us tonight? You like Taoism? That's good. That's great. Anything else? Who will the Trump crowd support next? Good question. Who will the Trump crowd support next? Great stream, Caleb, says Ramiro. Ramiro's great. Check out Ramiro's work. Why did you stop believing that struggle is the way to change people's minds? Why did you stop believing that struggle is the way to change people's minds? Well, that's interesting. I'm not sure I did. I mean, what is struggle? Right? Now, struggle, arguing with somebody, engaging with somebody. What is struggle? Right? I know in some of the Maoist groups, if they're engaging, if they're talking to you about politics, they think they're struggling with you, right? During the Cultural Revolution, they used to have struggle sessions. But that struggle is a way to change people's minds. Now, someone's saying, well, they meant class struggle. They meant activism. Well, I guess if you mean activism by struggle, not people engaging with each other, but activism. One of the problems with activism is that it's kind of like, what is it they say that, theory without practice is irrelevant, but practice without theory is blind. That, the Democrats have activists. The more I learn about the world and read theory, the more down I feel. How can I stay positive about our collective future? Anything you're looking forward to in the coming years? Okay, so stay positive. Looking forward to. Okay, so we'll finish the struggle thing. activism in and of itself isn't good, right? There is fascist activism. There is libertarian activism. There is Democrat liberal activism. There is social democratic activism. There's activism in and of itself is not inherently good, okay? That the reason activism is good is because you're being active for a good cause. And that there is a trend called movementism, where people focus on the struggle, the movement, and they start to water down and erode and forget what the movement is aiming for, right? There's the term revisionism, right? The idea, that's revisionism, right? It's supposed to be a bad word among communists if you're a revisionist. Well, the man who coined the term, who called himself a revisionist, was Edward Bernstein. And Edward Bernstein, his slogan was, "The movement is everything, the goal is nothing." The movement is everything, the goal is nothing, right? Meaning it's just about the struggle for everyday reforms. It's not about the actual goal of creating a socialist society. It's not about the revolution. The movement is everything, the goal is nothing. And that a trend called movementism believes that, right? That, hey, whatever liberals are doing, we communists, we're going to protest and we're going to be part of it. We're going to set up a cage. We're going to set up a sound system. And we are going to be king of the protest cage, and we're going to lead the movement, and who cares about communism? That's a bunch of nerdy stuff, and who cares about books, and who cares about facts and research, and who cares if we're actually getting closer to socialism? We're in the struggle, man. And I hate that. I'm sorry. I've dealt with so much of that. That is my biggest pet peeve. Movementism or movementarianism is just, it's a curse, because at this point, the liberals, during the Cold War, the liberals were at least, closer to what Marxists believe. That is not necessarily true anymore. I just read you about the Aquarian Conspiracy. I just read to you, I mean, a lot of these liberals are more warmongering than Trump is. A lot of them think that Trump's crime is that he met with Kim Jong-un, that Trump's crime is that he's not hard enough on Russia, right? So just going along with whatever the liberals are doing and trying to be king of the movement is a deviation. I don't have a username on chess.com. I've never set up an account on there. What do you think? Biden, Huawei. Okay, that's a good question. So, that's one thing. But in terms of struggle, arguing with people can sometimes change their mind. But in other cases, if people have barriers intellectually, it cannot be there are some people that are just going to have a barrier intellectually, and you're not going to be able to argue with them. So it's complicated. Alrighty. How do you stay positive? Well, the main thing is to connect. You said you're reading all this theory, but right now, this is a big trend. You didn't used to see this, right? And this is what's fascinating to me. See, I feel like an old man. I'm only 32 years old, but I feel like an old man. I remember the protests against the Iraq War. When George W. Bush invaded Iraq, there were all these anti-war protests. And what was fascinating is that, that protest cage, it was like everybody who wasn't part of the American order was in the same cage, right? And communists were the biggest leaders of it, right? The Answer Coalition was led by the Workers' World Party and what eventually became the Party of Socialism and Liberation. There was the United for Peace and Justice, which was kind of quietly led by people in the Communist Party like Judith LeBlanc, but was officially just kind of this broad tent with Democrats. And DSA people were involved in United for Peace and Justice. The RCP had their group. It was called Not in Our Name, which was technically kind of affiliated with United for Peace and Justice, but it was really the RCP kind of thing. And, and they ran the protests. But at those protests, the followers of Lyndon LaRouche would be there, and they would have their choirs, and they would be singing. And Webster Tarpley and whatever Webster Tarpley was doing was there, and the Alex Jones people would be there, and the libertarians would be there, and the right-wing militia Constitution people would be there. Everybody who was against the U.S. invasion of Iraq, it was basically a collection of people that were against the establishment of the United States. And the neocons were running the establishment at that point. And everyone who was against the establishment was in the same protest cage, basically. And that was how it went. And now, it's all different. First of all, the communist groups have gotten weaker and weaker and weaker and don't have the influence, right? They just don't, right? The ML communist groups don't. DSA is big. Meanwhile, like the LaRouche folks, they support Donald Trump. Alex Jones folks, they support Donald Trump. Libertarians largely support Donald Trump, and if they don't support Trump, they certainly hate communists, I'll tell you that much. Meanwhile, I mean, it's gotten really weird. I mean, politics has completely shifted, and what's interesting is that's because there are divisions in the ruling class. See, after 9/11, the U.S. ruling class was pretty united, right? They were pretty much all on the same page. Biden, Bush, Hillary Clinton, they were all for the invasion of Iraq. Even like Bernie Sanders supported the invasion of Afghanistan, didn't support invading Iraq. But, I mean, for the most part, the whole American establishment was for invading Iraq. Nancy Pelosi, all of them, right? So, they were pretty united. So if you didn't agree with the USA invading Iraq, you were a freak, right? You were a freak. And so you were in the cage with all the freaks, and all the freaks were together, because you were all against the invasion, right? And you didn't understand that Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein were best pals, and they had weapons of mass destruction, and they were going to kill us all. And so if you didn't support the invasion of Iraq, you were a freak, and, the head freaks were all communists. But there were right-wing freaks, there were libertarian freaks, there were conspiracy freaks, and we were all just in the same cage being freaks. And they had, and it was like they just had this little place in society for us to go where we would march and we would have our protests, and we didn't cause any problems. And they went on and had their wars, and they had their Patriot Act, and they did everything, and we were in our cage, and we were just, over there. And every so often they would do news stories about us. Look, a bunch of freaks are marching. Isn't that cute? And we were just irrelevant. And the U.S. ruling class was united, you have to understand. The U.S. ruling class was like so united that they had no need for activists really of their own. And that was that. But then, right, 2008 financial crisis, Obama administration. Now we're in a period where the ruling class are at each other's throats. They're fighting each other. So now, right, instead of discouraging people to be political, the ruling class is starting to encourage people to be political. That's something to be positive about. People are more open to these ideas than ever, right? And see, here's, I guess, back to the original point I was making. The person asked me how to stay positive. Here's the thing, right? There's a big trend I'm seeing now, a huge trend I'm seeing now, of young person, in their 20s and their teens, gets interested in communism, never meets another communist in person, ever, sits on Twitter, retweeting communist stuff, cussing out other people for not being communists, but never in their life joins any communist group, meets anyone else who's a communist in real life, and they just kind of sit alone on social media being a communist. And I don't understand that, right? But it's a reality. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of these people that are communists, but they've never met another communist. They've never gone to a communist meetup. They have never been a member of a communist group, and they have no desire to. And they just kind of, being a communist is just kind of a weird expression of their own social isolation, right? They're alone in the world. They're angry at the world. The world hates communists, so they become a communist. I can understand how, if that is your situation, be very, very hard to stay positive. And I mean, it's no surprise that third worldism is so big among these people, right? Third worldism says there's really no hope for building socialism in the first world. Well, there you go, right? I mean, if there's no hope, why do it? Right? I mean, that's why anybody who becomes popular and outspoken as a communist on the internet immediately gets attacked and hated by these people, right? Because, you get attacked, right? This is a trend, right? And I'm telling you, if you want to stay positive, you got to break out of that, right? I'm on the internet all the time, but, last week I was rather overwhelmed covering the elections and all the new developments, and you just get that feeling where you're just kind of barraged with information, and I turned my Facebook off. I turned my Twitter off, and I just said, you know what, for the next 3-4 hours, no Twitter, no Facebook, and it was huge. It was like a cleansing, right? It was like a cleansing, you know? I was just so much calmer, and I could just focus on what I needed to do. Social media can be toxic at times, right? It can be toxic. It's a useful tool. It's a useful tool, but it can be very, very toxic. And so I urge people to be careful with that, right? I urge people to be careful with social media because it can be very, very, very toxic. But I would encourage people to go out, find other people who are communists or socialists, who read Marxist theory, who are interested in your ideas, even if you don't agree with them, and meet them in person. Go out to dinner with them, spend time with them, talk about Marxism with them, right? Develop real human connections with other people who are interested in this topic that you're interested in. That's how reading theory won't leave you just depressed, right? Use your ideas, but build a real human community around your ideas. Don't simply have these ideas be your own little thing that you do on your Twitter page and on your own, right? Build a community around these ideas. Build real connections around these ideas. That's how you can stay positive. That's my advice on that. And what am I looking forward to? I'm looking forward to the fact that it seems like more people are going to be interested in socialism than ever before. Right? More people are going to be interested in what we have to say. Capitalism is in crisis, and the right wing is screaming communist, communist, communist all the time, and the amount of people that are interested in what we're talking about is rising and going up every day. I'm looking forward to this gosh darn pandemic ending, and we're going to be able to have social gatherings once again, and we're going to have Center for Political Innovation conferences with singing, with powerful speeches. We are going to start spreading a socialist message, a socialist educational, constructive, optimistic, anti-imperialist message all throughout this country. People are going to be reading our books. You know, I'm optimistic about, I've got the book on Kamala Harris. We published our own edition of the Green Book. We're having on November 21st another Center for Political Innovation web conference. But I'm also optimistic about the fact that, we're going to be publishing eventually our own edition of Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Engels. That's very exciting. I'm excited about organizing outreach teams. We've already got, somebody in Louisiana who is, distributing our literature on his campus. We got somebody in Texas who's distributing, the Green Book and our literature in his neighborhood. But we are going to start having outreach teams. People all over the country are going to become familiar with this. We're going to start having events in Louisiana and in Texas and in Arizona and in California and in Iowa and in Missouri. There's people, you don't know how many emails I get from people all around the country. Caleb, I live in this, this area. I go to this community college. I want you to come speak at my community college. And I always have to say to them, well, there's this thing called a pandemic, so maybe after the pandemic is over, but I am getting invitations. I meet a new person every day. People from Georgia, people from Alabama, people from Maine, people from Wisconsin. I mean, it is amazing. There is just a thirst for what we talk about on these lives right now. Look how much of a bumpy ride this was. We got cut off about 20 minutes in, right? And then we started up again, and I had to repeat myself. And you're all still here, right? Look at this. There is a huge thirst for what we're talking about on here. And once this pandemic starts to break, our ability to quench that thirst across the country is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. People want real socialism. They want real anti-imperialism. They want real Marxism. And we can offer it to them. We have a role to play. So that's something to look forward to. All right. Biden and Huawei. Will Biden make a deal to re-legalize Huawei technologies? We'll see. Doubtful. Apple certainly doesn't want that. Now Apple's on his transition team. But Biden seems to, he was in the Obama administration, and the strategy of the Obama administration was to try and build up U.S. influence within China. That was the Obama administration strategy, right? Trump administration wants to build a wall. You're with China or you're with us, one side of the wall, the other side of the wall. Well, the Obama administration, their strategy was, no, we're going to try and build up U.S. influence within China to try and push China to be closer to us. It's Russia we're going to be hostile to. That was the Obama administration's approach. Well, We'll see, though. Let's remember that Biden has compromised with all kinds of neocons in the lead up to taking office, so he may not be, as liberal as Obama was, just because of all the compromises he's made in order to take office. So it's complicated, right? It's not that simple. Not that simple. But my hope, why shouldn't I be able to buy a Huawei phone, right? I think, these lives would go a lot smoother if there was a Huawei phone. All right, folks. I'm glad that I was able to check in with you this afternoon. I'll be live tomorrow from home, so I'll be live. So let me just wrap this up. Sorry for all the chaos today, but hey, I'm going to have a great time clipping this and cutting this into pieces and whatnot. That'll be fine. But please share the link when it comes out about Silicon Valley. Folks, a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. The people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And don't forget, we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Good night, folks. Have a good evening.